All right, today we're going to dive into a recently declassified document that honestly is pretty mind-blowing. It pulls back the curtain on a startling conversation between two of the world's most powerful leaders and reveals a warning that, given everything happening today, is almost impossible to imagine.
So let's just start with the bombshell quote itself. This is what Vladimir Putin said word for word in a private phone call more than 2 decades ago. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. A junta with nuclear weapons. It's an absolutely shocking statement.
So the big question is, who on earth was he talking about? Well, the subject of that incredibly blunt warning was Pakistan. And the person on the other end of that phone line, none other than the President of the United States, George W. Bush. So how do we know all this? This whole exchange comes from a 2001 phone call transcript. It was just recently declassified by the National Security Archive. And what that gives us is this raw, totally unfiltered look into a conversation that was, never supposed to see the light of day.
Now, to really get how extraordinary this is, we have to rewind the clock. Let's go back to the early 2000s, because this was a completely different world for U.S.-Russia relations. It was a time when these two presidents were, and you might not believe this, actually friends.
I'm serious. This was a time of real partnership. Russia was a member of the G8. The relationship between Putin and Bush was so warm and friendly, they were literally caught on camera dancing together to traditional Russian music. Just try to picture that happening today. You can't. And this timeline here, it really just spells out how dramatic that journey has been, from partners to enemies. Right after the 9/11 attacks in 2001, Putin was one of the very first leaders to call Bush and offer his support. You fast forward to 2014, Russia gets kicked out of the G8 for annexing Crimea, and by 2022, well, they're outright geopolitical adversaries.
Yeah, the contrast is it's stark. In just 2 decades, we went from G8 partners to geopolitical adversaries. From post-9/11 cooperation to crippling sanctions over the war in Ukraine. From a real presidential friendship to almost complete diplomatic isolation. It's this wild shift that makes their private chat back in 2001 so fascinating.
Okay, so keeping that friendly context in mind, let's get into the specifics of this phone call. They're talking about Iran and a few other things, and then suddenly, Putin just completely changes the subject.
He tells Bush straight up that he is deeply, deeply concerned about Pakistan, and he does not mince words. He calls it, and this is the quote again, a junta with nuclear weapons. He says flat out, it's not a democracy. And then he asks this really pointed question. Why is the West so quiet about this?
Now let's be crystal clear on the meaning of that word he used. A junta isn't just a tough government. It's a military group that rules by force, usually after overthrowing the legal government. It means there is zero democratic rule. So the really crucial thing here is that Putin wasn't just criticizing Pakistan. He was basically calling its government totally illegitimate.
Okay, so you've got one world leader giving another this incredibly stark, direct warning. You'd probably expect a pretty detailed, thoughtful response, right? Well, what George W. Bush said next is maybe the most revealing part of this entire document.
That's it. I know. That was his entire response on the topic before the conversation just moved on. 2 words. That's all he had for a warning about a nuclear-armed country being run by a military junta.
So, why? Why such a short, dismissive reply? Well, that silence says everything, doesn't it? For the United States, Pakistan was and is a really crucial, if very complicated, strategic asset. It gave them leverage against Iran, and it was a vital staging ground for the war in Afghanistan. So for Bush to publicly agree with Putin would have been to admit a huge, politically embarrassing hypocrisy right at the heart of American foreign policy.
And that brings up a really important question. I mean, this conversation happened all the way back in 2001. So why declassify it and release it to the public now, more than 20 years later? What's the point?
Well, one very compelling theory is that the timing is anything but random. It's strategic. You see, Russia and Pakistan have been getting closer lately, especially through groups like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So releasing a document where Putin is on record harshly criticizing Pakistan, well, that could be a very calculated move by the U.S. to try and drive a wedge between them. It's a classic geopolitical chess move, right? Using words from the past to mess with alliances in the present.
So when all is said and done, what's the big takeaway from this little piece of declassified history?
Well, the main interpretation here is that this 2001 conversation was a moment of pretty remarkable foresight from Putin. It shows one leader pinpointing what he saw as a massive global risk, a non-democratic, military-run state armed with nuclear weapons. But it also perfectly highlights the West's willingness to just look the other way for strategic reasons.
And this was all happening long before it became a common topic of debate.
And that really just leaves us with one final, lingering thought. This single conversation has shed so much light on a specific moment in history and the complicated relationships behind the scenes. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other stark warnings, what other uncomfortable